There is in the subtitle of the book a little bit of journalistic license. The subtitle is The Troubled Rise of a Global Power. I think Brazil is not yet a global power. But I have to sell books, and I think it clearly has the potential to be a global power, and it has the ambition to be a global power. And I think we need to think about what kind of global power it would be. When Brazil became a mass democracy for the first time in 1985, the democratic politicians faced some big challenges on the economy, but they also faced a huge social lag that was in part the legacy of slavery, but it was in part because of the fact that the state subsidized production and subsidized business rather than investing in people, if you like, in health and education and so forth. Then last June, Brazil saw these remarkable spontaneous protests, which at their height involved around 1 million people, mainly from the middle class, both new and old, but according to opinion polls, supported at their height by around 80% of the population. And I think those protests are a turning point in Brazil. I think they're a turning of the political tide, and I think they represent the voicing from below of a new political agenda in the country.
What is going to be necessary to open up the institutions, to make them more efficient, to reduce the cost? And then how will this happen in a political system that, as you imply, is very hidebound? I mean, for all of the excitement about Lula's election, you say basically they made their peace with a corporatist state, a highly fragmented congressional system, a very decentralized federal system. What is necessary to sort of make that system sort of work and take the very dramatic steps it has to take to address some of these things?
I think the first thing that needs to happen is that I think the confidence of investors, both market investors and business investors, in the predictability of the macroeconomic framework needs to be restored. I think the two basic things that have to happen is that you have to raise the threshold for a party to get representation in Congress, and at the same time, if a new party is formed, it doesn't have legacy, doesn't inherit the legacy rights of its previous constituent parties or members from them. And the second thing that has to happen is that at the moment, the lower house of Congress is elected on a system where each state is a single constituency. So nobody knows who their congressman or woman is. You need to break those down into smaller constituencies.
Explain a little bit how Brazil sees the United States and how it sees itself in the relationship with the rest of the world. This sort of emphasis, as you talk about, on sort of representing the global South, and as part of that, sort of being a defender of national sovereignty, but often that comes into conflict with its own purported defense of human rights.
I think there are two kind of central problems in Brazil's foreign policy. The first is the region, and the second is the US. No? In the region, Brazil has kind of wanted to be the leader of South America and wanted to call the shots in the region and not have the US call the shots in the region. But on the other hand, it hasn't. But on the other hand, it's been a reluctant leader in many ways. It hasn't been clear about what its project for its neighbors is. So with the US, I mean, the US is at the end of the day the largest single market for Brazil's manufactured goods, and it could be, the economic relationship could be much closer. I mean, the US is sometimes to blame for the frictions in the relationships, but there is a basic problem that each side wants different things, I think. The US essentially wants a more open market in Brazil to sell into. It wants Brazil to be the sheriff of South America. Brazil's reluctant on both those things. Brazil wants the US to see it as a global power.
You expressed some misgivings about Dilma's chances in the elections in October? Explain.
Why do I think she might well lose? Because of the demand for change, because I think it's clear the election will go to a second round, and in the second round, it's actually a much more equal contest. Either side could win. I also think that if you're Dilma, in Dilma's situation, and you're in the campaign, and the campaign will start in earnest after the World Cup at the end of July, and if you're in the lead and you're falling, that creates a difficult dynamic. And I think you've seen in the last couple of months that Dilma is falling and the opposition candidates are rising. So, I insist that the election is wide open. Traditionally, Brazil and especially Rio was an export conduit for cocaine from Bolivia. And as a result of that, consumption started to grow in Rio, both in the favelas and in Copacabana and Ipanema and Leblon. What's happened over the past 2 decades is that consumption has really taken off in Brazil. And Brazil is now the world's second largest consumer of cocaine after the United States. And every Brazilian city of any significance is suffering a crack epidemic. And that's one reason why crime and the murder rate, which had been dropping, has gone up again. I do think when the government went into it, I'm sure they thought this was going to be the kind of crowning jewel in Brazil's coming out as emergence onto the world stage. It hasn't quite worked out like that. I mean, I think so far clearly it's been negative for the Brazil brand. I think the final judgment is not in. I think it will be less negative than it is now, but I think on balance it probably won't be enormously positive. But Brazil is a country with a lot of soft power. I mean, there's a poll out today from Pew which shows that quite a lot of people around the world have a rather positive image of Brazil. It's a country that attracts. It's a country with lots of problems, but it's a country that has lots of attractive features as well.